Okay. Okay, good evening, and thank you for joining the class. And this class is dedicated for the refuah shlema, for the complete and speedy recovery of two Hebrew Day School fathers who are both critically ill and who we're all around school praying for and hoping to hear good news. The first is Yeshua Michal ben Yafa, and the second is David ben Yafit. These are two young men with young children who unfortunately are both in the hospital with serious, very grave conditions. So please God, the merit of our studying Torah together and our learning together should accrue merit for them. We want to pass all the merit through to them, and they should have a refuah shlema, a complete and speedy recovery. The Torah reading this week is Chayei Sarah, and again, if you'd want to take an art scroll chumash and have it with you, or any chumash of your choice, I will try to refer to all of the places. The parsha begins recording the fact that Sarah dies at the age of 127, and the parsha ends recording the fact that Abraham passes away at the age of 175. These events didn't happen in close proximity to each other. Abraham was 10 years older than his wife Sarah. So it means that if she was 127, he was 137. So he lived another 38 years after she passed away. So in a certain sense, that's the time frame of our Torah reading. And although some communities have the custom of honoring the community's commitment to handling and taking care of people who are sitting Shiva, I've always seen this parsha as a celebration of marriage and a celebration of the value of two people being united as one. And that's the perspective that I really want to teach it from tonight. This parsha is amazing in that it is almost completely conversational, very untypical for the Torah itself. It records lengthy conversations, and then it repeats the conversations as they're retold to someone else. That's that covers the bulk of this week's Torah reading. And although we know that the Torah is very sparse on words and some major sections of Jewish law are just alluded to in a few words, the fact is that the rabbis teach us that the idle conversation of great people, of the patriarchs and their servants and their household, teach so much and can have so much impact on people and on the world and on the future, that the Torah devoted an almost unlimited amount of space to that lesson here. And just as we said in the introduction, please God, us discussing and articulating words of Torah should have the same impact. The overarching issue I want to address is the following. Marriage is becoming less and less appealing to our children and to the generation to come. We know it statistically in society in general. We know that marriages are considered to be less stable. But what I'm seeing is there's a tremendous reluctance for people to come to grips with a responsibility, or even to come to grips with the opportunity that marriage presents to them. And I wanted to explore this in light of this week's Torah reading. And it was interesting, once I decided to give the class on this topic, everywhere I turned, I was sort of hit with ideas that reinforced this. So we're going to go a little bit far afield as we track this down. But to get back to the fact that we're using words here to articulate Torah, we have a blessing we make over learning Torah. And I want to begin with this idea. It says, V'harev no Hashem Elokeinu es divrei soratcha b'finu. God should make sweet and pleasant and satisfying, the words of Torah in our mouths. And then very surprisingly, we say, it should be this way for us. We're on here today. V'tze'etza'enu, and those generations to come from us. V'tze'etza'enu, and for generations that'll come from them. It should lead us all, should inspire all of us. That's an astounding way to begin and to think about studying Torah. We're sitting here tonight. We're going to discuss Parshas Chayei Sarah. We're going to look at a few points. We'll spend 40 minutes studying together. It's words that go out in the air. Over Zoom, better face-to-face, but in any way, we're just communicating words for each other. But we have a wish and a yearning, and we hold out the possibility that these words of Torah will resonate throughout the generations. You know, it's, you know, from history, Abraham Lincoln stood at Gettysburg. He says, they will little remember nor long note what was said here. And yet we all memorized when we were in school in my day, the Gettysburg Address. But this is a different dimension. It's not a question of fame or fortune or creating a historic record. It's changing the trajectory of lives, even for people who are not yet born. So when we sit together and we say, oh, we're going to learn Torah together, we're going to study Torah, we're going to look at some insights, we're going to discuss a view of marriage and what marriage can offer individuals in a community and the world, we do so not to enrich ourselves, but we do so to bring an energy and a goodness and equality into the world that's going to unfold for generations and generations and generations to come. And I'll give you another example of this concept from the Talmud. The Talmud says that when a person teaches Torah in the world, and then throughout history, when he's quoted, when his words are quoted, it's like he's still speaking from the grave, so to speak. And you think to yourself, Rashi, just kids alone studying Rashi, tens of thousands of kids around the world studying Chumash, looking in Rashi. Imagine how much talking Rashi is doing today, and he lived 1,000 years ago. So these words that get spoken have a magnitude to them, and they commend us to think about the following idea. We're living in a time that is forever more short-sighted, immediate. Gratification is immediate. Decisions are made on what's going to matter to me at this moment. Anger is a language we use when we address any issue in the world, whether it's politics or whether it's social issues or whether it's even talking in the family. Words of anger come out. Why? Because anger is, I'm not getting what I want right now, so I'm angry. Anger is a sign of an immediacy, a short-sightedness, a sense of a lack of vision or scope, or any sense of looking for the long term. The Torah is going to guide us differently than that, and we'll see how that works. There's a prequel to this week's Torah reading. It's the last 3 sentences of the Parsha before Vayera, and it's to be found in the Stone Chumash on 104. And basically, after the dramatic events of Abraham offering Isaac as an offering, the Torah records in a very mundane way that Abraham heard that in his family living in Nachor, which is hundreds and hundreds of miles away. I looked on Google Maps today to look at Nachor. It's a town that exists today on the border between Syria and Turkey. It's the place where Abraham's family moved before Abraham was told to leave and to go down to the land of Canaan, to the land of Israel. A girl named Rivka was born there. That's what the Torah wants us to know. And then we come back to the main narrative in chapter 23. Sarah passes away at the age of 127. And her life is described beautifully as being 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. Every year had a quality to it that was enduring and made an impression on the world. And I just want to point out, we refer to Sarah, to this Sarah who was married to Abraham, as Sarah Imenu, a matriarch. She lived 127 years. Her one and only child was 37 when she passed away. If you just do the math, 80% of her life, she was a childless woman. Yet she's a matriarch. What do we mean by that? So we'll see as we refer to different things that the whole vision that Abraham and Sarah had together was to change the course of human history. We talked about it in this class a couple of weeks ago, and happy to send the references to people if they want to see them, that Abraham took responsibility for the whole creation, put it on his shoulders and said, okay, God, if this is the world you've created, I'm going to make it my job to elevate all of humankind. And he influenced people tremendously wherever he went. And we'll see tonight a little more insight into how that influence worked and what it came from. So these were people, two people living in the ancient world where there was no Zoom and there was no internet and there was no ability for mass communication. But they went about their lives with the absolute bedrock conviction that out of our marriage and out of our family and out of the manner in which we live and interact with the world, human history is going to change. And no, they did not invent the cotton gin, and they did not create Facebook, and they did not do any of the kind of things that we in this time and space believe are things that change the world. They were people that were lived with kindness and niceness, and they had an impact on the world. And we all know, we can see with our own two eyes that that impact continues today. When enemies in the Middle East start to sit down and talk to one another, they label it the Abraham Accords. Interesting, the Abraham Accords. It's a funny idea that there's no Christians involved in that, it's just Jews and Muslims. All these religions came from Abraham, but it's the Abraham Accords because that's what Abraham represented, mankind sharing values, sharing consideration, acting on behalf of one another. The antithesis of what the place of Sodom that got destroyed in last week's Torah reading was, which was a place of pure selfishness, a place where people wanted to make sure that not one penny of their wealth went to an outsider, and how to make sure that no visitor could come in and benefit from their society whatsoever. And as I described before, the Talmud defines the midat stone, the characteristic of Sodom, would be played out by a person who has a tree in front of his house. And on a hot day, a stranger sits down under the tree to cool off. And the person comes out and says, move on, you're taking my shade, the shade of the tree. That's the personality of Sodom, the antithesis of an Abraham who planted trees. His family dug wells, not for their own benefit, so that a passerby on a hot day could sit under a tree and cool off. So that if someone needed water, they'd say, oh, there's a well down the road. This guy Abraham dug it, or Isaac dug it. We have these wells today. Go to Beersheba, they'll show you the well that was placed there. And they did that for the good and for the benefit of the world, so the world would be a more pleasant place to live in. And they did it all out of conviction for the fact that that's what God's concept for the world was, that the world should be a pleasant place for people to live in. It should be a Gan Eden, it should be a Garden of Eden, where people live together in harmony and they help one another and they support one another and they're ready to do and share with one another. And that's the way Avram lives his life. That's the way Yitzchak lives his life. That's the way Yaakov lives his life. And we have accounts of the Jewish people under terrible alienated conditions living our lives to various extents, to a various way, wherever we went. So this brings us to the fact that chapter 24, which is one of the longest chapters. I didn't check if it's the longest. I don't think it's the longest, but it begins on page 108 in the art scroll, Chumash, and it runs 67 sentences long. Let's read it a little bit and let's get our feet warmed up in terms of what's going on. I'll read it in English for the sake of clarity here. Now, Avram was old and well on in years, and Hashem had blessed Abraham with everything And Avram said to his servant, the elder of his household, who controls all that is his, place your hand under my thigh, where he has his bris milah, because that's what covenant would mean, an agreement. And I will have you swear by Hashem, God of heaven and God of earth, that you not take a wife from my son from the daughters of Canaan, among whom we dwell. Rather, to my land and to my kindred shall you go and take a wife for my son for Isaac. Okay, look at the irony here. Abraham devoted himself to creating a way of life. He's an old man by everybody's standard, 137 years old. Not at the end of his days, has years to live, but he recognizes the fact that look how fragile my legacy is. It's time for my son to get married. Now he has everything. An interesting idea, because really I would say, in terms that we're talking about, is he has nothing. Because let's just look back for a second in the Torah to chapter 15, sentence 2. It's on page 67. God speaking to Avram, it's years before. And God says to Avram, fear not, I am a shield to you. We get this phrase, Mogain Avraham, what we say in the Amidah. I'm going to be your shield, and I have tremendous reward for you. And what does Avram say back to God? My Lord, Hashem Elohim, what can you give me since that I go childless? And the steward of my house is only this person, Damascus Eliezer, who's unrelated to me, and who's from the people of Canaan, and who's really incapable of carrying forward a legacy that'll span generation after generation after generation. He's not capable of that. So look at Avram's attitude. Yes, we're doing good work in the world. Yes, you're promising me all kinds of reward. But if I don't see it carry on, if I don't see it as having viability, if I don't see that the true fruition of that which I do today will be what resonates to the next generation or resonates to the next generation, then I've got nothing. So what does it mean Avram had everything? So Nachmanides really jumps in here. Note on the bottom of page 109 says it. And he says, everything, in a certain sense, there's an irony in the phrase of everything. I have no chance, I have no successor, I have no opportunity to foresee that the good that we're promulgating in the world will have a lasting effect. And I've given this little aspect a name. We know that Einstein talked about the preservation of energy, matter. I'm not really sure. I should have sorted that out a little bit before with my big scientific advisor before I gave the class. But we have this idea in the Torah of preservation of goodness, which is that when someone institutes goodness in the world, that goodness, it's always preserved. It's going to bounce around, and it's going to have ramifications for generations and generations and generations to come. And that's why when we learn Torah, we say the prayer that we said before, that it should carry forward. So Avram is in this position. So he takes Eliezer, who's an incredibly wonderful person, and we'll see that by the way he interacts with other people and the impact he has on other people. And he says basically three things to him, and they're embedded here. And because in the interest of time, if you just go back and look at those sentences, sentence 2, 3, and 6, you'll see them there. Number one, I have a particular covenant with God of circumcision. It's precious. It's meant to pass through our families as an inheritance. I need to know that that's going to be carried forward. Number two, my son cannot marry a woman from this place. He has to marry someone who has an extraordinary sense of purity and holiness to carry this legacy forward, okay? Much the way perhaps we all feel when we aspire to our children marrying fellow Jews. It's not that we're racist, it's not that we look down on other people, but we understand that there's a certain quality and a certain dimension that we, the Jewish people, are responsible to bring to the world. And it takes Jewish people to bring that to the world. And therefore, there's a certain sanctity, holiness. And that's why marriage in Judaism is kiddushin. It's a bond of sanctification to really preserve in the world that which were initiated by Abraham and Sarah. The third aspect is the land itself, because included in these instructions is my son Yitzchak cannot leave this land. So there's an irony here. He can't marry a native person to this land, but the sanctity of the land itself has to always surround him. Now, you just know, as of all the patriarchs and matriarchs of the Jewish people, Isaac is the only person who never left the confines of the land of Canaan his entire life. He was born in Canaan to his parents, Avram and Sarah. He lived his entire life there. He died there. Unlike Abraham, who came from a foreign place, went down to Egypt, left the country in the midst of a war. Unlike Jacob, who has to travel out of the land of Israel to get married, and then has to end his life in exile in Egypt at the foretelling of the Jewish people being enslaved there. Encapsulated in here is a sense of Abraham's yearning and vision that if we make a blessing that the Torah we study should have echo through the generations, so then we want to raise children who share that aspiration. And in doing so, we have a particular interest in upholding a covenant with God, in upholding a certain level of sanctity, and ultimately upholding a dream or a yearning or a sense that the completion of history is going to happen when we, the Jewish people, do return back to the land of Israel. All that's part of the same package. Don't you see? All that's the sense of these are the ingredients it takes for whatever goodness you and I have added to this world to see to it that it unfolds and carries forward and that it could resonate till the end of time. What an opportunity. What a great opportunity. Obviously, it takes a certain attitude. It takes a certain commitment. It takes a certain vision. And it takes people getting married to one another under the chuppah of these attitudes and these ideas. So that's what we're seeing right here in this parsha. And that's why it's such a royal sense of looking for the future. It's such a sense of goodness being carrying forward. It's such a tremendous sense of understanding that if I do a kindness tomorrow, that kindness is like a change in the universe that will carry through, can carry through. And I should be mindful of that. And therefore I should love the opportunity to do goodness and to fulfill the world and to carry things on in the world. And with that comes a certain sense of adopting a vision that something may not suit me at this moment, but I can see where it has value played out over time. And it's going to preserve and strengthen that which is most important. So there's a discussion that you'll find about this parsha, an irony. Is this parsha a look back? Because after all, it talks about Abram mourning the loss of his wife, Sarah, also a topic in marriage, but that they had this unique bond and this unique relationship, and that Abram understood that a certain opportunity for him to impact the world ends when his marriage ended. And the Torah certainly treats that seriously, because we don't find from the recording of Sarah passing and being buried that Abraham has any further impact on the world. So his impact was a product of his acting in the world with his wife, Sarah, hosting people, doing good, having her support, supporting her, listening to her when she gives him advice, as God has to intercede and say, Whatever she tells you, that's what you should do. All these nuances of relationship permeate the whole Torah. So when the Torah closes out Sarah's life, it closes out the import of Abraham. And as it talks about finding a wife for Yitzchak, and as it talks about the criteria for that wife, and as it talks about Rebecca choosing to leave her parents' home all the way up in Haran and travel with a stranger to become married to a stranger, but to enter into this household of Abraham and to join her opportunity, to see that opportunity that's going to change history. And I dare say, and this is a preview of coming attractions, that no woman, none of the matriarchs, and they all had giant roles to play, and the Torah highlights all of them, but were as fearless in shaping the future as we'll see Rebecca was. Rebecca was the most fearless in taking initiative and in reshaping the future of the Jewish people. But here we meet her as a little girl, and she's at the well. And if you read the narrative, and and I just want to read a little bit of it. So the servant comes, and by the way, the servant is Eliezer, the same Eliezer that was referred to back in chapter 15 as not being the guy who could carry forward the legacy of Abraham and Sarah. But he certainly is a dutiful person. And Rashi adds a little subplot that he had a daughter who he was hoping would marry Isaac instead of, and hoping that Rebecca wouldn't come back, but yet he fulfilled this thing. And just interesting to note also that in 68 verses, where Eliezer is the main character, his name isn't mentioned once. So if you take a look at chapter 24, all 68 verses, it will refer to the servant, the servant, the servant, the servant, the servant. Avram talks to him, he talks, he represents Avram, he negotiates, he invites Rivka to come back with him, he brings Rivka back. Never once is his name mentioned. Something we'll think about exactly why that's important another time. But let's look on page 111, what happens. He arrives at the city of Nachor. Okay, quite a trip and quite an assignment to find a fitting wife and somehow convince her to willfully choose to come back all the way back with him, back to the land of Israel. So what does he say in sentence 12? Hashem, God of my master Abraham, may you so arrange it for me this day that you do kindness with my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the townsmen come out to draw water. Let it be that the maiden to whom I shall say, please tip over your jug so I may drink, and who replies, drink, and I will even water your camels. She will you have designated to be the wife for Isaac. And may I know through her that you have done kindness with my master. The idea of kindness here is because Abraham's entire being is represented by kindness. But let's expand the sense of kindness. Abraham knew that what he did then could change the way you and I behave. So when Abraham did kindness, he did kindness so that a couple of thousand years later, you and I would be sitting here on Zoom, and when we're done with this class, we'll act more kindly to one another. So when Eliezer, the servant, evokes God to be kind here, he's hitting the perfect note. Kindness is where it is, because preserving this legacy, creating this legacy, changing the world from a dog-eat-dog, competitive, brutal place into a Garden of Eden where people care about one another and support one another and do kindness to one another. What could be more kind than that? And what could be more kind than to change it for thousands of years to come? So therefore, Eliezer rightfully evokes kindness. And understand something here, and this is something that great commentaries of the Jewish people comment on, commentators comment on. there's no mention of God here. There's no mention of religion. Rivka grew up amongst idolaters. Her family worshiped idols just like the people Avram had left behind. But it's character. It's a sense of, am I living for the moment where I want to take everything I possibly can from the world? Or do I have a broader scope? And am I the kind of person that when I see a wayfarer standing by the well, and even though I'm a little girl, and he's this big guy with camels, I would approach him and say, can I help you? Can I offer you some water from the well? Can I take care of your camels? You look hungry, you look tired, you look like you're in need of guidance. I'm here to offer that to you. That's the beginning and the end of the criteria that the servant of Abraham sets up. And this carries all the way through. He speaks to her very beautifully. He ends up back in her house. Her family's not the nicest group of people. Her brother is Lavan, who we're going to meet over and over again, and who, when we sit down on the Pesach Seder, we're going to describe her brother as being worse than Pharaoh, who enslaved the Jewish people for 210 years. Okay, so this is not, home on the prairie. This is an encounter with an individual who has surpassed and created a world around herself as a young girl that's so reflective of the values of a Sarah and a Rivka. And in sentence 34, the servant says, when they ask him, speak, and he says, Eved Avraham Anochi, I'm a servant of Abraham. What a magnificent thing. I mean, here I'll just tell you just a little bit of a viewpoint, let some wealthy person come to me and say, okay, I want you to fly to Paris tomorrow. And I'm going to send you with jewels and letters of credit, because he had all these things with him, Eliezer, and I'm going to put you in the fanciest car imaginable, and you're going to drive down the center street in Paris and see who you meet. And I get out of this car and a person comes over to me and says, who are you? Am I going to say, well, you can see I'm an important fellow. I mean, look at them. I'm a servant. I'm just here as a messenger. I'm just here to do a job. Such humility on the part of Eliezer, such focus on fulfilling every aspect of what Abraham wanted him to do. And then he talks and he talks. Genesis 34 tells the whole story over again. Like I say, the Torah is so wordy here. Describes how she gave him water, gave the camels water. He asked her who she was. She said she was a relative of Abraham's by describing who her family was. And he described this whole scene. And then he says very, very clearly, I'm only here for one reason. I'm here to find and offer an opportunity to a woman, and it's going to be, I'm offering it to your daughter and sister Rivka, to travel all the way back to the land of Canaan with me, and to continue this unbelievable legacy that Abraham and Sarah has begun. What's he offering? Why? And then the family said, well, we'll wait a year. They try to push him off, something that all of us should resonate with. When we have this tremendous inspiration to do something good, you can be sure that certain voices in our own heads and our own hearts, okay, cool it, you want to give a tzedakah, that's really a nice thing. You wait till tomorrow, you'll see what the stock market does, you'll see if everything is really okay, and then you'll decide. Nope, he wants an answer right away, because he wants to seize the opportunity of staying true to the mission that he's given. And Rivka says, and they ask him, will you go? And she answers very directly in sentence 58, I will go. What's her basis for saying she will go? So let's think about it for a second. Number one, she sees the greatness of an Eliezer, who we know back in chapter 15, Abraham himself says, look, I have Eliezer, he's a great person, but he's not going to do it for me. But she must be thinking to herself, if his servant is this refined, is this holy, is this committed to sanctity and holiness and to the holiness of the land of Israel and to the mission, how much more so must my future husband be? And what an immense opportunity this presents to me to really change the world in the most significant ways it possibly could be changed. And I want to tell you the flip side of the coin as I see the rabbis expressing it. The flip side of the coin is Rivka thought to herself and realized, my greatness is in my character and my devotion to higher values of doing good. I could live my life securely here amongst my own family and not take any risks. But no one would ever appreciate me for what's truly great within me. Here's my opportunity. Here's this man who comes out of the blue from a land so far away, and he's offering and he represents this grand vision of tikkun olam, of making the world into a fantastic place. And not as a slogan, but as a way of life, as a way of living every day, as a quality of a marriage and a relationship. And she realizes this is perfect for me, because this is the setting within which all that I value about myself and all that I see as really good within myself will be able to come to fruition and will be able to really have an impact. And who knows how much greater of a person I'm going to develop into. Okay, and a little, not to spoil the unknown of the next couple of weeks, she ends up taking on Yitzchak at a critical moment and seeing to it that this legacy continues through Yaakov so that it endures until today. And she risks it all, her relationship with her husband and her relationship with her kid and everything else. She reaches that level of development, and perhaps now she has an inkling that if I go with this man and I attach myself to this household and to these values and to this way of life, who knows what greater good I can become. Who knows how much bigger of a person I can become? Who knows how it will impact me in the future, and therefore how much greater of an impact I could have on the world. So she's in. I will go, very simply, one word in Hebrew, Eilech. I'm going. They bless her, they give her a blessing. And I don't take that blessing lightly, because please God, you'll have daughters who get married. You'll see that there's a tradition amongst the Jewish people that when your child, before your daughter goes to the chuppah, the father of the child gives her a blessing, which is taken from here. That you should come to thousands and myriads. Again, that same theme, we should see your impact spread and develop and echo through history and have an ever-ending impact on the lives of everyone who's going to come after you. So that's the blessing we give our kids. You turn over the page, she encounters Yitzchak, her future husband. She covers herself. She's a beautiful woman. She has nothing to hide. It's not that she didn't have time to put her mascara on before they had met him, but she understands that I'm here because of the inner qualities and commitment, the impact that I'm going to have throughout time. That's what I'm here for. So I'm going to approach this modestly. And it's actually an interesting little note here, and it's in the Art Scroll Siddur. It says, Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother. He married Rivkah. She became his wife, and he loved her. And this was what Isaac consoled after his mother. Some commentaries say the following thing, and it's a wrinkle. Rashi doesn't say it this way, but others do. He encountered her. He said, okay, move in to my mother's tent. You know, everybody had their own tent in those days, I guess. And he saw that the blessings that came from heaven and showered upon his mother, specific blessings, and they're very Kabbalistic. Number one, when she lit candles to honor the Shabbat, because they really did keep Judaism all the way, even though it's before the Torah, the candles burned throughout the week. Okay, when she baked challah, just like we all did for Shabbat San Diego, the challah stayed fresh throughout the week. There was a cloud of glory that had gone when Sarah passed away that returned and hovered over that tent. And again, by the way, it hovered over Sarah's tent. It didn't hover over Abraham's tent or over Yitzchak's tent, okay? Because it takes a marriage and a union of two people who have this vision, who take on this responsibility that Abraham and Sarah initially took on to themselves. And the responsibility is, as we described it a couple of weeks ago, the responsibility is God created the world to benefit mankind. It doesn't seem to be happening. We're going to have to jump in and bring God's world to fruition so that it happens. And that's what I quoted before when it says, "Vayikhu Hashemayim v'aretz," that God completed things on the Shabbos so that we human beings could then carry on and bring everything to fruition and carry through history, carry through human lives, all the goals that God set for the world. Sounds pie in the sky, it's very pie in the sky. But for some remarkable, amazing reason, for thousands of years now, we, the descendants, the products of the marriage of Avram and Sarah, and the products of the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah, Yitzchak and Rivkah, to some extent, in a measurable way, we've been doing that. And the only reason we did is because of the vision with which they launched their lives and their marriages and the vision they had for themselves and for their children. And we can continue to do so to whatever extent we do that as well. And I just in closing want to address one thought about whether we look backwards or we look forward. And this was a little bit of an esoteric reference. I came across it totally by accident, but I'll tell you what it is. If you look in the book of Devarim, chapter 8, sentence 18, so it's easy to find. I didn't write down the page number in the art scroll, I'm sorry. But there's a section here where Moshe is about to leave the world. And Moshe's big concern is that we, the Jewish people, carry on. So I'll go back to sentence 11 there. Take care lest you forget God. Stop observing the commandments. Stop the Jewish way of life. Lest you eat and be satisfied and forget about God. Again, lest you become immediate gratification people whose vision extends from the end of one meal to the beginning of the next. That's your horizon. And as long as you see that something good is coming in a few hours, we have good reservations to eat in a nice place for dinner, I'm okay. Try to avoid that. And he concludes this section by saying, you should remember the Lord your God, because it is God who gives the wherewithal to you to create strength in the world. And what's the kicker here? The final phrase, Lamanokim et brito asher nishba avotecha. And God does this in fulfillment of the covenant that he made with your forefathers. So that when we live in the world today and we undertake something that's good, we undertake something to build our community, we undertake something even for our own financial betterment, to provide better for our families or for ourselves, whatever it is, we can't factor God out of the picture. But when we factor God into the picture and we're mindful about doing things honestly, doing things out of sensitivity to other people, doing things within the guidelines and channels that the Torah lays out for us, and we are successful, that success itself is God fulfilling the covenant that he made back in the beginning to Abraham. When he told Abraham, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to guide you, I'm going to make you great. And God says, what are you talking about? I don't have any children. So here we are today, we're the children. And we still live off of that bank account. We still draw revenue and interest and success and strength out of that. So that's where we are today. And let's try hard to impart this vision to our children so that when it comes time for them to, as the Torah says in Genesis, to leave their father and their mother and to bond themselves in a marriage to someone else and to build a new home, that we can give them some of that scope and vision and excitement to undertake and to carry forward this legacy which we, the Jewish people, have offered to the world. And please God, in doing so, believe me, you will accrue for yourself and for the community tremendous nachas, enjoyment, satisfaction. You will feel better than any gratification that wealth or power or triumph could possibly give you. So please God, we should all see, as we say, the words of Torah should remain sweet for us, and we should see these words of Torah resonate in our children and our children's children, and we should envision the sweetness resonating all the way through generations and generations to come. And please God, we should hear good news, and we should find Yeshua for the people who are ill, who were learning in their merit, for Yoshua Michal ben Yafa, and for David ben Yafit. Everyone should have a good night. Thank you very much for joining the class. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.